welcome to Last Drop Podcast. My name is Alex Taremwa. I'm sitting in for the amiable Bella Twine, and Francis Emokule is always behind the scenes. Today is a special day. We have a very special guest. If you're in Uganda, you call her Naomi, but if you're in the United States, she's Naomi. She's the Corporate Communications Manager at Uganda's National Environment Management Authority. That's the powers that be as far as protecting the environment in the country is concerned. Naomi, would you care to say hi to our listeners? And
hello, listeners.
Thank you. So Naomi, you've been in the news this week, and then the last week when you opened the can of worms on the express penalty scheme that the authority has launched. Some of the feelings on the streets is that the penalties are a bit harsh. Some penalties not very warranted, particularly the one on car dustbins, where you say from April 1st you will take 6 million from any motorist that doesn't have a car dustbin in their car. Some say their cars come with such compartments, so there's no need. My Uber guy on Saturday said that I should tell you that for him, his passengers don't throw anything outside. It keeps in the car until when he goes home and safely disposes it off. What are your feelings? Do you hear on the street about the same, and how exactly do you intend to go about this car dustbin and generally the express penalty scheme?
First and foremost, probably would be to clarify that the whole dustbin name to the law was coined by the media. But the law actually is in respect to littering. That's the problem that is intended to be solved, littering. Waste management is a big issue in Uganda. We're trying to promote tourism and we're trying to attract people to come to visit our country. But waste management is a big issue. And not only that, a lot of money is spent on managing waste, which is really a behavior thing, something that we can all manage if we chose to. You indicated that you think that the punishments are a bit harsh or that the fines are a bit stiff. They can all be avoided. They can really all be avoided. You're not going to be asked to pay any coin or a million or 6 or up to 11 if you hold on to your waste. And it's just as simple as that. And to begin with, when April 1st comes, of course we're working with policemen, we're working with local governments. In Kampala we are working with KCCA. We're going to enforce, this is no doubt. But we will start with buses, the commercial vehicles, buses and the taxis and the commuter taxis. Those are the ones that we're going to start with because they are the biggest culprits. We intend on working with some of the petrol stations and require that those buses or commercial vehicles hold on to their waste, dispose of it at a designated place, perhaps a petrol station or a place that would have been designated by a local government. So we're not starting with everybody. So come 1st April, start with commercial vehicles and then progress to individual cars, to personal vehicles, and eventually to homeowners and to commercial buildings and to different areas. And this is in the interest of all Ugandans. It's not a NEMA thing. We are not excited to cause anxiety. It's in the best interest. When the environment is clean and healthy, it's in the best interest of every Ugandan. It's the practice in all East African countries. It's the practice world over. Just support it and hold on to your waste. That's it. Just demonstrate that you have bins on your commercial vehicle. So it's something that we should all be excited about and look forward to complying with. Because if you don't actually and you litter or you're caught littering, you are going to be made to pay. The Consolidated Fund is looking for resources. This will be a fantastic source.
Absolutely. But for the ordinary Ugandan, they feel today is a good day. There's rain in Kampala after quite a bit of time. I'm sure that in the drainage channels now, the plastic bottles have started to gather. Hence, there'll be some floods maybe on Ginger Road or somewhere. Why is it that rather than go after the manufacturers of, say, plastic bottles, say Coca-Cola or Pepsi or Renzori, you decided to come to the end user instead? Why has there not been, or maybe one of the penalties in the scheme targeting the manufacturers of the said plastics, so that maybe they can also be pushed to create some easier to use degradable materials rather than the plastics?
The express penalty scheme is a raft of offenses and fines thereof. And waste management is one of those. There are other programs that will take care of producers of waste or plastic for that matter, there's a program called Extended Producer Responsibility, where producers of plastics will be required to collect the plastic that they produce. For example, Coca-Cola collects 9 out of 10 bottles that they put out. So those programs exist, and we're working with producers. But even then, producers of plastics themselves are users of the same plastic. So it's not a section of public as opposed to the other. So there are offenses for a whole lot of things, and producers of waste in one way or the other are attended to.
Within the same framework, I assume, is the enforcement finally for what has become the infamous Kavera. There were some directives that have come on the Kavera, I think, almost 3 times now, ranging from way back 2011 or 2013 up to now. But there's still Kavera all over the place. The polythene bags everywhere. Now we moved to not just every Kavera. You gave the 30 microzones. I don't know how you determine those. But still, the plastic Kavera has remained a menace in Uganda. How can Ugandans trust that the enforcement of now, for example, this dustbin littering issue is going to work when the ones, say, for Kavera has not worked?
You see, NEMA does not write laws. It's Parliament that does. For us, we partly propose and then also partly implement together with police. So with plastics in 2009, the law that came out was to ban use, distribution, sale of plastics of up to 100 microns, and then to manage the rest. Management means in some instances to reuse, to reduce, or to recycle. There are many stakeholder segments that were opposed to that mechanism of banning and then managing. And they said 100 microns is too much. So it was reduced by Parliament and brought down to 30 microns. There's nothing that NEMA can do about what Parliament does. These are independent organs of government. So that's what they passed, and that's what we can implement in the circumstances. But we will propose revisions, and hopefully in the meetings that we have been recently having, there's general agreement that revision of the plastic ban needs to be looked into, and hopefully we'll have an updated version of the law that is practical and easier to implement.
Speaking about your engagement with Parliament, recently the Executive Director of the authority met with Parliament's Environment and Natural Resources Committee. Obviously, we're coming from celebrating the World Wetlands Day, and within his presentation, he talked about Uganda's wetland cover being almost on the track to recovery after quite a bit of destruction that went around. In fact, some of the opinions within the Ugandan elite were that NEMA could not even protect wetlands from invaders. People who went and put in factories, they are mining sand in Rwera, for example. They haven't taxed those, but they have come to me with my polythene or my dustbin in the bag. How can we ensure, first, that the gains that we've made on the recovery of wetlands continue, and also how can we ensure that there's a bit of enforcement with those that invade wetlands? I know there's an enforcement on government getting them out of wetlands. Maybe there are some penalties that are already in this express penalty scheme, but how can we get back on track, both in wetlands and, if you will, in the forest space?
That question arises frequently at different fora, why NEMA should be trusted, or when they have failed at managing wetlands or forests for that matter, never mind that forests are under the mandate of another agency. But I think one needs to understand the framework within which environment management is done. NEMA does not work alone. We are not supernatural, located somewhere in Mars and using remote and robots to manage the environment here in Uganda. We are located here together with several Ugandans. The same pressure that a regular Ugandan faces when they are looking for where to live, NEMA faces. So it's a general dynamic that has many facets to look at. For example, the land tenure system in Uganda is private. All the land in Uganda is titled, except a few public lands which are held in trust, for example, wetlands, riverbanks, and lake shores. Those are the ones that are not titled. So when there is pressure on land, Uganda's population is growing in leaps and bounds daily. When there's land pressures, you can trust that people are going to take risks and invade these ecosystems. In NEMA, as we speak, the total workforce is 120 members of staff. Those are the ones who are supposed to look after all those little public lands in the country. There are challenges, We do not have resources. You heard the recent pronouncement by Ministry of Finance. There are no resources. You cannot look after these resources without resources. But we don't have those. So there are very many challenges that we have to grapple with. But I have good news for you. For example, on forest cover in 2020, the forest cover was 12.5. But as we speak, in 2022, it is at 13.2. It has recovered. There are programs that are going on, but the programs that are being undertaken cannot outpace the discipline of Ugandans. The programs and the laws and enforcement cannot outpace the discipline of individuals, unless as individuals you are committed to protecting the resources that are within your power to manage. NEMA cannot come into your compound. We need cooperation from public instead of criticism. We are trying. There's recovery, as you can see. Uganda still has wetlands, despite the pressure for land for settlement, for agriculture, for industry, for industrialization. Despite all those pressures for land, you still have wetlands, and big ones, especially in the rural areas. So it's not that we are sleeping. Their efforts. So instead of criticizing NEMA is not doing this, we shouldn't trust you. Look at your own actions. We are not regulators of aliens. We are regulators of Ugandans. So if you comply, NEMA does better. If you choose not to comply and go to bash, that's what there is.
On that note then, what can an ordinary Alex Taremwa or Francis or some other Ugandan do within their own spaces to help you achieve your objectives? What on a daily basis can a Ugandan do to help the environment recover? What are those small things that don't require money?
Thank you. That's a very good question, and that's the question that every Ugandan should ask. First and foremost, every land that you have that is not in active use, plant a tree there. In the road reserve near your home, plant trees. In your compound, plant grass so that there's less runoff when it rains. Carpool. Ask your members of parliament to legislate things that are pro-environment. Let's minimize everybody coming into town with cars. Let's use have efficient public systems so that there's not a lot of dust through transport. There's this common saying that during COVID, the air quality improved. Why? Because there were no cars and boda-bodas on the road. So we can minimize those and use the efficient mass public transport system. We can legislate and have better policies in place. For example, to build low-cost houses for the people who encroach on wetlands. We can agree that for all developers and manufacturers, they restrict their work to industrial parks instead of giving them land, for example, in wetlands or part of the forest. So those are the things that we should be pushing for. Those are the things that those should be the things that you demand of your representatives in parliament. Those are the things that upon which you should measure their performance. If they are not doing those things, don't vote them. Those are the things that you should be asking them to do. Not every issue should be about NEMA bashing and people creating careers and professions out of bashing NEMA. It will yield nothing unless everybody is interested and takes responsibility for what they can. And those who have land by the lake shores, to plant trees, not to encroach.
That's great. At the last drop, our motto is that we can slow climate change by behavior change. And I'm very glad that even from experts, that's the opinion. Perhaps now, if we can have the law that says supermarkets, instead of giving us Bavaria where we shop, they can allow us come with our own bags, take our things so they can keep their Bavaria. Personally, I don't use Kavera at home. I don't carry plastic water bottles. I'd rather have my own water bottle from home. Some of these things contribute to a healthy environment, and it's some of these small actions and steps that are going to create the big changes. Naomi, I don't know if you have any parting shots that you could share with the general public as we wind up.
The one thing that really I'd like to emphasize, and I've said this in quite a few fora, is that environment is for all of us, that it is shared. That, for example, we are suffering the impacts of climate change when we do not emit any meaningful carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So what happens in one corner of the world impacts us here. What you do in your private life affects your neighbor. So be mindful of your environment. Be mindful of what you're going to leave for your children. Because for us, we are fast growing and getting out of here. But what are we leaving for our children? Debt to pay. So we ought to be more considerate, more responsible, to do better, each one of us. Like you said, you don't hold plastic. I don't either. That's two. Imagine if in all our circle that was a practice. There are people who plant trees on birthdays instead of buying plastic wrapped gifts. We could make that culture. We could change. Environment unites us. It defines who we are. We are a proud Ugandans because we have fair climate. It's part of the environment. So we should aim to make that better instead of abusing it and then turning around and asking NEMA to do better.
Thank you for being on the Last Drop podcast. You can trust that in the Last Drop Africa you have a partner who share the same message, and hopefully one by one we can achieve a bigger impact. Thank you for listening to us. You can follow us on our amazing social media platforms. It's at Last Drop Africa on almost every social media platform. See you next week. Bye bye.